Hola, estás en Café y Confesiones, un rincón donde las palabras fluyen como una charla con un buen amigo, sin prisas, sin filtros, solo historias de corazón a corazón. Sirve tu café y ponte cómodo. Empezamos. Julia decided in early childhood on something that seemed indisputable. Girls were either captivatingly beautiful or piercingly intelligent. The girl, endowed with rare insight, understood perfectly that the choice was hers, and without hesitation, she stepped onto the path of wisdom. Before her eyes always loomed the example of her older sister, Elena. Elena was the embodiment of that very beauty everyone around admired. Her hair flowed like silk, light blonde, like morning mist, her eyes shone with mermaid green, and her figure, it was usually called modelesque. From a very young age, Elena was entirely consumed by her appearance. Yes, she read, but her reading was limited to glossy magazines with tips on makeup, diets, and everything related to maintaining an ideal image. And Elenita's friends were just like her, pretty, flighty, like moths fluttering over life. Julia, watching them, mentally dubbed them pretty airheads. Her mother, bearing the burden of raising two daughters alone, placed special hopes on the elder. "Just you marry well, Elenita, and we'll be set," she often repeated, like an incantation. Julia, in those years, was still a tiny tot, a primary school student. The little girl sincerely wondered, how could one shift the responsibility for one's own happiness and well-being onto another person's shoulders? Hadn't her mother, who had already been burned on this path once, learned any lessons? One day, Julia dared to ask her mother a direct, almost audacious question. "Didn't you marry Dad because of his money, and he left us, went to someone younger and prettier, and didn't even leave anything for you or us children because she had good appetites? And now you're teaching Elenita the same thing, so she ends up like that too?" "Bite your tongue!" her mother exclaimed, throwing up her hands as if warding off bad thoughts. "Our Elentita is completely different. Firstly, she's young. Secondly, she's much prettier than me. And besides, she has me. I had to figure everything out on my own, but I'll guide her, teach her everything. Everything will be fine for Elenita, and for you too, if you listen to me." Julia just sighed heavily then. Her mother was undeniably beautiful and kind, but annoyingly frivolous. Both her mother and Elenita lived as if in a pink haze, nurturing dreams of a beautiful life and sincerely believing that appearance was the main, if not the only, key to a woman's success. Julia differed from her peers not only in her views but also in her character. She was firmly convinced to achieve something in this life, you had to work hard and persistently. The options her mother and older sister had in mind, rich male benefactors, seemed shaky, unreliable, illusory to her. Elenita jokingly called her younger sister the bore. Her mother constantly tried to mold Julia to her own pattern, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most striking thing was that the parents sincerely believed she wished her child well. "I'm worried about your future. How can't you understand? You turned out to be such a beauty. You got the best from me and your father. You finish school and we'll find you a wealthy suitor. Just don't be such a grouch. Men like cheerful and smiling girls." "No, thank you. After school I'm going to study economics," Julia replied, looking her mother firmly in the eye. "Do you know what the competition is like there?" Elenita immediately jumped into the argument. "You either have to be a genius or have good connections." "Yes," sighed her mother, "we can't afford commercial education, and you won't get in for free." But Julia, trying not to listen to these arguments like the sound of wind, steadily pursued her goal. Day and night she pored over textbooks, looked for extra courses online, mostly free ones, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in a local supermarket, simply had no money for her daughter's education. Her father was barely involved in their lives. He had a new family. Of course, he transferred some paltry alimony, but that was it. No communication, no support, no help in difficult moments. Julia learned from childhood. She couldn't count on him. Deep down, the girl dreamed of meeting and talking to her second parent at least once. It seemed to her that perhaps she had inherited her character from him, as Julia was nothing like her mother and Elena. But he didn't seek meetings with his daughters. And Julia? She didn't want to impose, and it was scary to face indifference or, worse, dislike from a relative. Her father was a businessman, owned a chain of stores, and seemed to earn good money. The property was prudently registered in his new wife's name so that the ex-wife and children couldn't claim anything. It seemed ugly, petty. Julia, ideally, should have been as offended by her father as her mother was, as Elena was. But Julia had a different dream: to study economics, start her own business, and one day meet her father on some business matter, a joint project, a profitable contract, something that would put them on equal footing. Let him see what his daughter had achieved on her own, without his help, and then perhaps they could talk. And Julia achieved her goal. She got into the economics faculty she so passionately desired on a state-funded place. How happy she was to see her name on the list of admitted students. She shouted right in front of the computer monitor, jumping for joy, almost touching the ceiling. "Are you crazy?" Elenita peeked into the room, holding little Juan in her arms. She had recently become a mother, giving birth to a son from a rich man. He paid child support regularly, but had no desire to communicate with his mother or with Juan himself. Needless to say, that alimony was mere pennies. A standard scheme: undeclared income, most earnings hidden. Elenita had indeed repeated her mother's fate, only in an even more bitter version. But she wasn't giving up and continued to dream of a prince who would sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her elder daughter in everything, adored her grandson. This was perfectly natural. Julia also enjoyed playing with the baby when she had time, but the girl saw, you can make as many plans as you want, but if they are based on hoping for another person, they are shaky and often lead to disappointment. It was time to choose a different option. But no, Elenita was still glued to dating sites, looking for bigger prey. "I got in," Julia explained the reason for her wild excitement to her sister. "Wow, cool. Does that mean you're moving out, going to the city to study?" Julia and her family actually lived in a city too, but a very small one, far from the regional center. Gray 3-story buildings, entire streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. On paper, not a village, of course, but essentially. That's why Oreyovsk, the regional capital where Julia's university was located, everyone called it the city. Her mother was also happy to hear about her younger daughter's admission. As it turned out, she hadn't even hoped for such an outcome. She thought, let the little one be stubborn, and then, after listening to her more experienced relatives, she'd realized she needed to find a rich and reliable man. But look how things turned out. "You got in. Well done, daughter." Her mother hugged the younger one, moved to tears. "I'll help you however I can. I won't be able to send much money, I'm sorry, but I'll find at least a little for housing and living. And you need to dress nicely in the big city. There are more chances to meet a decent person." "Mom, not again." Julia smiled. She was touched that her mother supported and understood her and even offered help. Julia knew her mother earned that money with difficulty, but she was willing to help her daughter while she was still a student. And that was priceless. Julia's new life began. She was allocated a room in the student dormitory, not a private one, though. She had to share the space with 2 girls. But her roommates turned out to be exceptionally pleasant. Both were studying at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, like Julia herself, were focused on their studies and future work. In short, the girls found a lot in common. Julia quickly became friends with one of them, Katya. They continued to communicate even after they finished their respective universities and moved into rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. In her first year, she was completely convinced that she had chosen the right path. Economic sciences came easily to her, lectures seemed fascinatingly interesting, and term papers and tests were ridiculously easy. Julia even started earning extra money. It turned out that people were willing to pay considerable sums for essays and projects. Considerable, of course, by student standards. The girl had to work hard and study hard. She had absolutely no time for student parties, clubbing, and other entertainment. And sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out, relax. But the girl understood. Every minute counted. Her time was too valuable. Besides, she had little money. Her mother sent her a small amount each month. Julia knew it was a significant part of her mother's salary and was immensely grateful. It was little, very little, but still, it was her mother's help that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after the third year, when something suddenly changed at the university clinic and students were required to pay for the dormitory. Before that, you could live there for free. Julia economized on literally everything, but she didn't despair. She knew she was heading towards her goal, which meant that sooner or later everything would be fine. Everything would be just as she had dreamed it would be. But before the new year, an event occurred that forced Julia to reconsider all her plans and literally turned her whole life upside down. It happened during that anxious time when, before the holidays, students rush to pass all their tests so they can start the winter session without debts after the new year. Julia was just preparing for a test in economic history when her sister called. Elena's photo appeared on the phone screen. In it, the girl smiled broadly and looked like a movie star. Julia immediately felt something had happened. Otherwise, Elenita wouldn't call her out of the blue at 1 a.m. It was she, Julia, who wasn't sleeping, preparing for exams. But her sister should have been fast asleep by then. "Something's wrong with Mom." Elena's voice, sharp and breaking, came through the receiver. She seemed on the verge of hysteria. "Come." "What happened?" Julia felt her limbs go cold, and her stomach suddenly felt very empty. Anxiety squeezed her heart with an icy, rough hand. "Bus, what? When? She's alive." Getting coherent answers from Elenita was completely impossible. She was already sobbing and whimpering into the phone, uttering only disjointed phrases. Mostly, it was lamenting how scared and bad she felt right now. Apparently, the trouble had happened in the evening, but Elena was only told just now, literally a couple of minutes ago, and she immediately called her sister. Of course, there was no talk of tests or exams at that moment. In the morning, Julia took the first available bus home. At the bus station at such an early hour, she was almost the only passenger. Julia found her sister in a terrible state, disheveled hair, a face swollen from tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, little Milena. Elena was already a mother of 3 children. First, her son Juan was born, then 2 girls, Christina and Milena, born a year apart. None of the fathers were involved in raising the children. Princes, sons of wealthy parents, refused to raise their offspring and paid them off with paltry alimony. They had simply amused themselves with Elena, meaning nothing serious. And me, and them, my children. If something happens to her, how will I manage with them alone? Elena looked at Julia with bewildered eyes, as if expecting her to offer a solution. But Julia, at that moment, she was ready to hit her sister. Something was unknown about their mother, and she was only thinking of herself. "How did it happen?" They told me Mom was crossing the road in the wrong place. She jumped out right in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. Apparently, he's also in the hospital now. He had a heart attack right there, on the spot. While they sorted things out, they called me late at night, and I immediately called you. "So Mom is alive?" Julia clarified, freezing with hope. That was the most important thing for her. "In the hospital in Morozovskaya." Julia rushed out of the house, calling a taxi on the go. She had to get there as soon as possible. She had to understand what was happening with her loved one. At the hospital, Julia was given terrible news. Her mother was gone. She had passed away very recently at the very moment Julia was rushing to the clinic. It happened in intensive care. The doctors said the injuries were too severe, and Julia wouldn't have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma. And still, the girl blamed herself for not holding her mother's hand while she was still. Julia was signing some papers when a sobbing Elenita called her. Someone she knew had brought her to the hospital. It was a difficult, drawn-out time, organizing the funeral, exhausting attempts to bring her sister back to her senses, who, despite everything, had to take care of her little ones, and the gradual, painful realization of the terrible fact. The dearest and closest person in the world was no longer there. Simply gone, that's all. Her father did not appear at the funeral, although, of course, he couldn't not know what had happened. This man didn't even call his daughters, didn't try to understand if they needed his help. He probably considered them adults now. Both were over 18, so legally the father was no longer considered their debtor. He had paid alimony regularly until his daughters came of age, and they couldn't expect more. It was then, by her mother's grave, that Julia finally understood that she would not meet or communicate with this man. Even they, Elena, her mother, and herself, were not needed by him, nor was he needed by them. Resentment didn't appear. No, Julia simply realized with piercing clarity that her father was completely alien to her. Perhaps they were similar in some ways, but her father, he was a stranger, just a stranger, and that said it all. But Elenita was family, and she needed support. Her sister cried incessantly for several days, and Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry it out, it would be easier for her. While her sister dealt with her grief, Julia helped her with her nephews. The little ones, even in such a terrible situation, made her smile. It was impossible to watch their funny games or listen to their sweet babbling with indifference. More than anything else, her nephews showed Julia, life goes on. Julia couldn't stay with her sister for long. The winter session wouldn't wait, and Elena had already recovered a little, even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted even more for an adult, supportive person to be by her side. Her mother was no longer there. Julia, despite everything, passed the session with excellent grades. This meant she could stay in the dormitory, but the dormitory had become paid, and she also needed to eat, dress, and pay for transportation. Julia tried to combine studying and working in a cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible. She immediately accumulated a lot of absences and debts. In the end, the girl didn't even get permission to take the next session. Inevitable expulsion loomed ahead. Julia tried to negotiate with her professors, asked for a chance, promised to pass everything, but she still couldn't. The only way out was to transfer to distance learning. But there was a hitch. The state-funded places were all taken, and the commercial option cost a fortune. An unexpected solution was offered by the rector. One day, he called Julia to his office and proposed the only option he thought was suitable. "I know your situation." The man, who always reminded Julia of Carlson, just as good-natured, plump, and short, began fatherly. "You are a diligent, promising student. I want to help someone like you, so I will pass your session despite everything. Let's mark them as passing grades, even if they're just average. And you take an academic leave for a year. I'll help you. You'll manage. You are a determined person, and then you'll re-enroll, and I'll help you with all the nuances again. How does that sound?" Julia thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies at all. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session wasn't passed. That was a fact. That meant expulsion. And where would she go? Go home, to her parents' apartment. Well, Elenita's new boyfriend, a young and seemingly good guy named Esteban, was already living there. Unlike Elenita's previous admirers, he wasn't a rich guy. He worked on a construction site, toiled from dawn till dusk, and seemed to earn a living. Elenita loved him very much, and he had accepted all her children. Perhaps they would truly become a family. Julia was completely superfluous there now, and she didn't want to live with her sister herself. No, Julia loved her very much. She was the only relative she had in the whole world. And yet, Julia was used to peace, solitude, freedom, and there was a large family there. That wouldn't be possible. And ultimately, she didn't want to leave Orejovsk. It was a big city. It was beautiful, spacious, interesting. There were more prospects for work and study here. The urban-type settlement where Julia's childhood had passed was associated in the girl's mind exclusively with melancholy and hopelessness. No, she absolutely didn't want to go back there. "You know, I think I'll take your offer." Julia smiled at the rector, feeling relieved. "That's a good girl," the man beamed. "You're doing well. You'll manage everything. Just don't forget to save up for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We'll be waiting for you. Agreed?" Agreed. Having thanked him for the offer, Julia began a frantic job search that same evening. She urgently needed money just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation there was. It turned out that finding anything close to her desired profession with an unfinished higher education was simply unrealistic for the girl. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers wouldn't even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl understood that she could certainly prove herself in an interview, but she didn't even get that far. After a couple of days of fruitless searching, Julia realized it was time to let go of her dream of working as an economist, or rather, postpone it until better times. For now, she had to find something, anything that would allow her to get by. When her expectations lowered somewhat, things went better. Many vacancies were found for Julia: waitress, cleaner, salesperson. However, the salaries offered were meager. No, it would be enough to live on, especially if she economized on literally everything. But Julia needed to save up for her studies in a year, and with such salaries, that was completely impossible. And yet Julia desperately needed a job, urgently. She chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. There were enough reasons for this place. Firstly, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, shift work allowed Julia to write term papers and tests for others. It was extra money in her savings, and her brain didn't get rusty. Pure advantages. Julia even liked working at the bar. The staff turned out to be remarkably friendly and united. The management was loyal, and the clientele was decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about their reputation. They maintained the atmosphere. Undesirable elements were escorted out by security and not allowed back in. And also, musicians gathered there every evening, local bands and performers, visiting guests. In short, live music. And it was wonderful. Julia enjoyed listening to the musicians singing along to familiar songs. This was welcomed at the bar. Going to work like going to a party. Julia finally understood the meaning of this common phrase at the bar. Of course, you couldn't save much from a waitress's salary. Julia was simultaneously looking for another, better-paying job. But the girl knew. Even when she had to quit, she would come back here to visit, just to be in this wonderfully warm atmosphere. The rock bar and her new friends helped Julia get through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother didn't disappear, but the girl was finally able to return to life and believed that there was still much good ahead. It was in the rock bar that Julia met Sergio. One day, the host introduced a new rock band to the guests, which had appeared just a couple of months earlier. Sergio was the bassist. But not only that, he was the one who had the idea to create this group. He was the one who wrote the songs and music. Modest, always staying in the background, but constantly observing everything: the behavior of the band members, the audience's reaction. Sergio was the unspoken leader of the team, although the charismatic vocalist drew most of the attention on stage. This was noticeable at first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out from the crowd and felt an inexplicable attraction. She didn't recognize herself. Julia understood perfectly that she was not in a position to fall in love and start romances right now. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on re-enrolling in university. She couldn't scatter her energy on all this. She couldn't get distracted. And yet, Sergio didn't joke or flirt with the waitresses. He was focused on his work, immersed in music. Perhaps that's what captivated the girl. Sergio was very much like her. Sergio started appearing at the bar often, sometimes with the band, to work, sometimes just with friends to relax. Of course, they soon met. But he still acted somewhat distant, didn't show open affection. Although sometimes Julia did catch his eye on her. But Sergio immediately turned away, as if caught red-handed. Julia wanted him to notice her, compliment her, show her attention, as visitors often did. And then Julia would let him know she was interested in him. One day, a girl was in Sergio's company. No, female representatives had come with him before, friends, girls from the band. But this one? There was clearly something special between her and Sergio. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing that obvious. But sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled at each other very warmly. And one day she rested her head right on his shoulder, and Sergio, usually cold and even stern, stroked her hair with a natural, very gentle gesture, like a kitten. An unpleasant feeling stirred in Julia's chest. She, of course, immediately recognized it. It was jealousy. With amazing meticulousness, Julia began to look for flaws in her rival. Too thin, even skinny, that's not pretty. Long nose. Her hair was somehow too thin. In short, how could this madam compare to her, to Julia? It seemed that for the first time in her life, Julia felt smug about her appearance. Nature had endowed her, like Elenita, with beauty. Julia had heard compliments about her figure many times. Tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends even unanimously advised her to try out for a modeling agency. But that work was not at all to Julia's liking. She didn't know how to display herself, even considered it somewhat humiliating. Despite such impressive looks, Julia's rival was this kind of blue-stocking. In short, there was nothing outstanding about Sergio's companion, nothing to catch the eye. Nevertheless, he clearly felt very tender feelings for her. The presence of this girl made him happy. Julia watched Sergio carefully and could say with certainty, this was true. He loved his companion. It hurt. Thanks to the girl who clung to Sergio so much, Julia made up her mind. She decided to do something she had previously considered completely unacceptable for herself. Her shift was almost over, but as usual, she stayed late to help her friend waitress serve tables. It was Saturday evening. Julia waited for the right moment. Before that, she had a drink for courage to feel more confident and relaxed. Sergio got up and headed for the exit. Someone had called him. The music was booming in the bar. It was impossible to talk on the phone in such an environment. Everyone went out, some to the street, to the bar's porch, some to the smoking area. Sergio chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow. Now or never. The unpleasant girl who had been sitting next to Sergio all evening remained at the table. She was chatting cheerfully with his friends. It was clear they had known each other for a long time. Perhaps it was a long and serious relationship. And yet Julia would try. Otherwise, she would regret not even trying later. Sergio stepped out onto the porch. He paced the small area in front of the bar with long strides, patiently explaining something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. Sergio wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. The conversation was clearly serious or unpleasant. It didn't matter. Julia would approach him anyway. As soon as Sergio hung up and was about to return to the bar, Julia came out to meet him. Fortunately, they were completely alone on the porch at that moment. "Hi," Julia smiled at him, feeling her voice tremble. "Hi?" Sergio looked at the girl with interest, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Didn't we already say hello?" "Yes, we did," Julia nodded, trying to control her trembling. I need to talk to you." Sergio stopped somehow, prepared himself for a conversation, showing with his whole demeanor that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. After all, he could have brushed her off or shown irritation, displeasure. But Sergio looked at her with his dark, intelligent eyes and waited. I like you, and I have for a long time." Julia decided to get straight to the point, as if diving into cold water. I don't know how to explain it. I'm drawn to you as if by a magnet. I've never felt this way before. I don't know what to do with all this." Julia lowered her eyes, feeling her cheeks burn. Well, she had said it. What now? Sergio was probably looking for words right now to politely brush her off. Most likely, that was it. Julia suddenly felt unbearable shame for her action. Why had she approached him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? "Julia!" In the next moment, the girl felt a gentle touch, as if she were an incredibly fragile vessel. Julia. Her own name, uttered by Sergio's lips, sounded like beautiful, ethereal music to the girl. "Julia, I couldn't even imagine this." Sergio looked at her and smiled. And he smiled so rarely. His eyes, the girl clearly saw, shone with happiness, sincere, real. What was happening? Was he happy about her confession? Instead of words, Sergio kissed Julia. The girl's head swam from it all as if in a whirlwind. He hugged her, or rather, held her, because the girl's legs literally gave way. He kissed her, then stroked her back and head, gently pressing her close. "I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm drawn to you just the same way." "Then why? I never even noticed anything. I thought you didn't care." "I didn't want to embarrass you. Probably a mistake. And besides, I'm older. Too old for you. I thought you were attracted to completely different guys. Brutal, successful. With looks like yours, anything is possible. You're incredibly beautiful. You even inspired me to write a song. I realized that Elven Princess is about you." "No," Julia confessed, smiling shyly. "It's a very beautiful song. I like it. I never thought that it came about because of you." "Well, yes, only—" "And that girl, who came with you, are you together?" "Together?" Sergio couldn't help but smirk, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Together since my parents brought home a bundle tied with a pink ribbon from the maternity ward and said, 'My sister.'" "So she's your sister?" Julia burst out laughing, feeling a huge weight lift from her soul. "And I thought, that's why I decided to have this conversation today." My sister. Sergio held Julia closer and inhaled the scent of her hair, as if it were the most precious perfume. "She's just passing through the city. She's been married for a long time, lives far away with her husband. She just missed her good-for-nothing brother." Julia and Sergio started dating. It turned out that all this time he had indeed been attracted to the beautiful waitress. Why hadn't he made any moves? He was planning to, but later, when he had more financial freedom. He had a clear idea in his head. Girls aren't interested in losers. There was too much going on with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And strangely enough for a rock musician, Sergio was shy when it came to talking to girls. No, he had many female friends he could chat and laugh with. But Julia, she aroused completely special, tender feelings in him. And this made Sergio, who was used to performing in front of hundreds of people, shy. But Julia took the first step, thus destroying all of Sergio's doubts and opening the door to their future together. And so they were together. Sergio himself suggested moving in together. They decided to choose Julia's apartment to live in. Convenient location, reasonable cost, cozy room. So it turned out that Sergio moved in with her, but he immediately took over paying the rent and minor repairs, which every home occasionally needs. And it also turned out that Sergio was an excellent cook. A creative person, as a creative person should be, he created real masterpieces, both in the recording studio and in the kitchen. He was tender, sensitive, attentive, completely immersed in his creativity, but not forgetting his loved one. They talked a lot, often walked around the city at night. Sometimes they discussed the latest song that was buzzing in Sergio's head and about to be born. Sometimes Julia would suggest the right phrase to her beloved, and he would happily seize upon the idea. And then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, she had participated in creating a hit. Julia completely dissolved into her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting Sergio, she didn't even know what it was like. Love for a man. She hadn't had time for it. First, diligent studying, then exhausting attempts to survive. It turned out it was pleasant to have someone by your side who hugs you, asks about your mood and well-being, looks at you with admiring eyes like some princess, and to melt from the touch of warm, strong hands, knowing at the same time that he, this tall man with black eyes, was ready to do anything for you. Elenita didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she approached everything with her own measure. He's poor. He doesn't even have his own apartment, and no stable job or business. He's a musician. He has his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There are tons of these one-hit wonder bands. Whether they'll succeed is unknown. I think you placed your bet on the wrong person with your looks. It's a pity. Okay, me? I have 3 children. Who needs me? So I make do with what I get. I don't complain. But you? However, Julia didn't expect her sister to understand her. They had always been too different, as if from different planets. But Julia didn't need understanding either. She was happy, loved. She had found a relative, a close person. Yes, he was going through a difficult period now, but Sergio was trying, working towards his goal, working hard, looking for the right contacts, planning things. Julia supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion, saying many times that he was grateful to fate for such a gift for her. One day, Sergio undertook a rather risky venture. He invited a famous rock band to Orejovsk. The plan was for his band to open for the renowned musicians. This event was supposed to increase Sergio's band's popularity, and also organizing such concerts was a way to earn good money. But something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. There was a big rock festival happening in the neighboring region. Sergio hadn't considered this, or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already set in motion. In short, Sergio ended up with a big loss, paying the musicians' fees, renting the venue and equipment, tickets for the rock band, advertising. All this was only half covered by the money earned from the concert. The concert itself went well, but Sergio had huge debts that needed to be paid off as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to watch her beloved during this period. He looked bewildered, anxious, like a lost child. She wanted to help him with something, anything. But how? Where would the money come from? Sergio took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him. The situation improved slightly, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Julia offered her help. She had savings, money she had been putting aside for her studies. Not much, of course, but still something. In addition, the girl did something she had been against for a long time. She sold the gold jewelry her mother had given her for her 18th birthday. This money was enough to cover the debt. "Where did you get it?" Sergio asked, surprised, when Julia handed him several stacks of crisp, new bills. "Well, someone unexpectedly paid me back a debt. Plus, the insurance finally paid out for Mom's case. The girl lied, looking him straight in the eye. She knew, if she told Sergio the truth, he would never take the money from her. But this way, it seemed like it wasn't her last resort. "Thank you." Sergio hugged Julia tightly, pressing her close. "I'll pay it all back, you'll see. We'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back." Sergio paid off the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. Saving up for her studies was now completely impossible. And besides, her salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar was going through tough times. It was good that Sergio bought groceries and paid the apartment rent, meaning he took on the main part of the expenses. Sergio's income came from a few corporate gigs and occasional odd jobs. Unstable earnings, but still a stream that didn't dry up. Sometimes little, sometimes a lot. Julia didn't worry about it. She basked in Sergio's attention, in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, and support. Julia tried not to think about the future, especially. Well, she wouldn't re-enroll in university this year, she'd do it next year. It was no big deal, she still had time. The main thing was that he, Sergio, was by her side. Julia hadn't known before that she was capable of such deep, all-consuming feelings. And then Sergio disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing terrible happened to him. It all started as a business trip. Sergio grabbed Julia by the shoulders and even shook her slightly, unable to contain his emotions. His eyes burned like two bright spotlights, illuminating the world around him. "Can you imagine? I was invited to the USA to write music for a band. They found me online, they liked it, and now they're inviting me." Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band Sergio was talking about. They were very popular musicians who toured the world, and they had noticed Sergio. They were offering him a collaboration. Incredible. "I'll have to leave for a while," Sergio continued, his voice trembling with excitement. "Do you understand what this means?" Julia nodded. She understood. Money, fame, dizzying opportunities for Sergio's growth and development as a musician, useful contacts and connections. He would get what he hadn't even dared to dream of. They would have to part for an indefinite time. After all, Sergio had clearly said, "I'll have to leave." Me, not us. Feverish preparations began. Sergio had many issues to sort out. Firstly, finding a replacement. Someone had to play in his band temporarily while he was away, of course. Secondly, Sergio started processing his passport and visa. Thirdly, packing his necessary belongings. In all this hustle and bustle, he seemed to have completely forgotten about Julia, as if she didn't exist. Sergio was too engrossed in the upcoming changes, the opening prospects. The girl looked at him and understood with bitter clarity. He would forget about her. He would forget her there, in another country, deafened by new impressions, inspired by work and success. Perhaps Sergio would even find someone more suitable for his new status there. He hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will fly by quickly, and besides, there's video calls. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll finally earn a decent living. I'll pay you back the debt. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we'll even buy an apartment. My band will take off. I'll gain invaluable experience there. I'll understand how things work. Everything will be fine. Sergio sincerely believed this. Julia saw he wasn't lying. He wasn't being cunning. But something cold and unsettling told the girl. Everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. Sergio himself just didn't realize it yet. And that's how it turned out in the end. At first, Sergio called every day, as he had promised, telling her how he was settling into his new place. Everything thrilled him. Impressions overflowed, as if spilling over the brim. Then he suddenly disappeared from the radar. He just vanished. He didn't call himself, and he didn't answer Julia's calls. The long rings consistently ended with a message that the subscriber was apparently busy and couldn't answer. Julia was initially worried, thinking something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw a recent performance by that very band on a music channel. Sergio was with them. Somehow very changed, more mature, even more serious than usual. So, he was fine. He had just apparently decided to start a new life and cut off all previous ties, including forgetting about her, about Julia. At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain. But Sergio disappeared completely, vanished from her life as if he had never been there. Julia made it a rule to watch the music channel every day. From time to time, she saw Sergio. He was never in the spotlight, but he did sometimes appear in the camera's view, and quite often there was a girl next to him, the same one, either the band's makeup artist or costume designer. Beautiful, striking, with a predatory glint in her eyes. Apparently, there was something between her and Sergio. There had to be. Julia was desperately jealous of Sergio, both of this girl and of her beloved's other potential muses. It hurt her. It hurt more than anything ever had in her life. And she was also hurt to tears. And scared. Scared of being alone again, without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant, poisonous mix of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing, more earthly ones. Money. Julia barely made ends meet. After all, she had a tiny salary and the heavy burden of the loan. In the end, the bar went bankrupt anyway. It was bought out by new owners who turned it into a hookah lounge. Julia had to quit, like all the previous bar staff. Another blow. Julia had special memories and feelings associated with that place, and now the bar was gone. The cozy bar where you could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. Sergio would have understood her, supported her. Everything was simpler and more pleasant with him, but he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and, it seemed, had already forgotten about her. Sergio had no idea of the desperate situation she was in. After all, he never found out about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with an extra sum she had unexpectedly received. And of course, he didn't suspect about her losing her job. And even if he had known, he had no time for Julia now, when the whole world had opened up to him. Julia had no time to dwell on grievances or think about what might have been. She desperately needed a job, preferably a well-paying one. And so the girl tirelessly monitored ads, looking for something that would help her crawl out of the financial hole. It was good that the landlord agreed to wait for the payment, but his patience wasn't unlimited either. A little longer, and Julia would be asked to leave. This ad caught Julia's attention because of the sum they were offering for the services. A pretty good figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems, as if by magic. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. They needed a caregiver for a little girl. Apparently, she was unwell. The diagnosis wasn't disclosed, but they made it clear. The child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including taking medication on schedule, escorting her to procedures, and so on. Julia thought about it. She did have experience taking care of little ones, of course. The girl even enjoyed playing with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children. She knew how to feed them, change them, keep them busy. But here it was about a sick child. Apparently, a severely sick child. Could she do it? At least it was worth trying. Julia called the number provided. A pleasant male voice answered. This person asked the girl several questions: age, occupation, education, experience with young children, and she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She desperately wanted this job. She needed it like air. It was such a chance to climb out of the financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else could she find such a salary? So the girl was anxious, worried, as if before an exam on which her whole life depended. What if they didn't hire her? What then? Look for a waitress job again and work for pennies? A taxi brought Julia to a suburban cottage village, an elite area, tall, beautiful houses surrounded by impenetrable fences. At the gate, the girl was met by a woman, the housekeeper, as Julia later learned, and in fact, the person on whom everything depended: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, Viktor Petrovich, was always too busy. Businessmen generally have very little free time, as if they have none at all. Viktor Petrovich met the job seeker in the spacious living room. He was a man of about 40 with intelligent, piercing blue eyes in which deep sadness could be read. Perfectly styled hair with a slight graying at the temples, a sporty, toned figure. Yes, this man clearly paid attention to his health and appearance. Julia was initially intimidated, feeling awkward. How to start a conversation with such a person? Next to him, she suddenly felt insignificant, small, and out of place. "Good morning." Viktor Petrovich smiled warmly, and Julia's embarrassment vanished instantly. The man's smile was open and kind, like a ray of sunshine. Viktor Petrovich immediately felt like someone familiar, a kindred spirit. "Hello," Julia smiled back, feeling her shyness recede. "I'm here about the ad." "That's very good. I'll tell you right away. I need a caregiver for my daughter, Sonieta. She's in a very serious condition right now, so it's not for everyone. Her health is monitored by doctors. They come here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sonia, but how can I put this? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I'd like someone else to be by her side. Well, a young girl like you, cheerful, knows many songs and stories, can entertain a child, inspire her, come up with some interesting activity. In short, brighten up her leisure time." "And what's wrong with your little girl?" Julia couldn't help but ask, feeling her heart clench. "Who knows?" Viktor Petrovich lowered his eyes, his gaze heavy and tense, as if he carried the weight of the world. "Sonieta has been examined everywhere. No one can figure anything out. Her body, it's as if it's destroying itself. There are no signs of autoimmune aggression. They constantly take samples. They would have noticed. But she's fading, and nothing helps her. Poor little one. The doctors say they can. Do you understand? They aren't omnipotent, unfortunately. In short, Sonia needs more than just a nanny. For that, we have Vera Antonovna, our beloved housekeeper. She'll feed her, give her medicine on time. And we don't just need a caregiver either. Sonia is supervised by nurses. They perform all the necessary procedures. Sonieta needs more of a friend, perhaps. Someone who can bring her positive emotions. Doctors say that's very important in her condition. And looking at you, I think you're just that kind of person. Young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have kind eyes. You can empathize. That's good." Julia nodded, feeling a wave of compassion and determination rise within her. She already wanted to see Sonia as soon as possible. If the little one needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia would definitely cheer up the girl who had been struck by such a serious illness, brighten the gray days of the little patient, find a way to make her life more pleasant and brighter. "If you are ready to start working right away," Viktor Petrovich continued, as if in a hurry, "then let's begin. A trial period, well, let's say 3 days. And then Sonia will decide. Of course, you will be paid for your time in any case. Well, do you agree?" "Yes," Julia nodded without hesitation. "Excellent," Viktor Petrovich beamed, his face lit up with hope. "Then Vera Antonovna will introduce you to Sonieta, and I must go. Business awaits." When the door silently closed behind Viktor Petrovich, Vera Antonovna, a middle-aged woman with an unusually soft and comforting gaze, turned to Julia and asked, "Have you been around little ones before? Do you know what small children are like?" "I have nephews," Julia nodded. "That's good." Vera Antonovna shook her head, sadness in her voice. But our Sonieta? She's an unusual child. You've probably already realized. Sonia barely gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to interest her in anything, but we must. Sonia needs to be distracted from her pain, from her suffering, and she also needs to go for walks. At least an hour a day. That's what the doctors said. I understand. Well, now let's go meet her. Julia followed Vera Antonovna upstairs to the second floor. She entered the children's room. It was a spacious room fit for a true princess. A huge window let in a lot of daylight, flooding everything with a soft glow. Shelves lined the walls, filled with expensive toys and colorful books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, even a trampoline. A little further away was a ball pit with colorful balls. And closer to the door, like an island in the midst of this splendor, stood a bed. What a bed it was! Large, round, with a pink canopy cascading in soft folds. Julia looked around with curiosity. She had never seen rooms like this before, as if they had come straight out of a fairy tale book. Could all this be for just one child? Amidst this splendor, Julia didn't immediately notice the little mistress of the room. The girl lay in bed, surrounded by large, soft toys, as if in a sea of plush animals. There was Baton the cat, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over its body, and a thin, pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost blending in with the white bed linen due to her unhealthy skin tone. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the newcomers with curiosity. In them, one could read an unchildlike wisdom and sadness. Sonia propped herself up on her elbows, although it cost her a great effort, and addressed Vera Antonovna. "Who is this with you? A new physical therapist?" The complex word rolled off the little one's lips easily and habitually, and it felt utterly unnatural for such a fragile creature. "No, sweetie, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. You'll play together." "With dolls?" Sonia brightened slightly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Whatever you want." Julia smiled at her, feeling her heart clench with pity. The girl evoked not just sympathy, but deep, piercing pity. "I really love playing with dolls. That's good, because Vera never has time, and Dad doesn't know how to play at all." "Adults have a lot to do," Julia shrugged, trying to choose the right words. "That's why they're sometimes boring," Sonia suggested, and smiled conspiratorially, as if sharing a great secret. "Boring," Julia agreed, returning her smile. Sonieta laughed softly, her laughter like the ringing of crystal bells. "Well, I see you'll be fine together," Vera Antonovna exhaled with relief. "You entertain yourselves here, and I'll go make lunch. And Sonia, you remember the nurse is coming today, right?" "I remember," the girl frowned, the joy on her face instantly fading. "Another IV?" "Well, what can you do, dear?" Vera Antonovna kissed the girl on the crown of her head and left the room, leaving Julia alone with the little patient. Julia was left alone with Sonia. "Well, shall we play?" the girl asked her charge with a smile. "There's just so much to choose from. Better read to me," the girl requested, her voice sounding tired. It seemed that even such a short conversation had taken her last bit of strength. Sonia settled back onto the pillows, pulled the blanket over her thin body, although the room was warm and cozy. "All right," Julia agreed. The child's weakness surprised and horrified her. 7-year-olds, they were such energizers, bundles of restless energy, like Juan, her eldest nephew. He was the same age as Sonieta, but you couldn't get him to sit still for 5 minutes. He was always climbing somewhere, inventing something, running around the house like a hurricane. If the boy had suddenly found himself in this room, he would have immediately started jumping on the trampoline or sliding down the slide. Elenita called him a perpetual motion machine. And Milena and Christina weren't far behind their brother, even though they were younger. but Sonia lay there, poor thing, flat on her back, like a broken doll. What should I read to you? About princesses. There's a book on the windowsill. Vera started reading it to me, but she doesn't have time, so you continue. It was a heavy, beautifully illustrated book with bright pictures, but the story itself, it seemed somehow silly, boring, predictable, and cliché to Julia. She hadn't liked such fairy tales at all when she was a child. How about we make up a story about these princesses ourselves? Julia suggested, hoping to see a spark in the girl's eyes. As Julia expected, a flicker of interest, like a small light, appeared in Sonieta's tired eyes. How do we do that? She asked, lifting her head. Very simple. I start, you continue. The activity captivated Sonia. She inventively created adventures for the princess. Sometimes she rode in a race car, sometimes a dragon kidnapped the heroine, and then a handsome prince rescued her. The girl's imagination flowed like a gushing spring. It seemed she had long lacked this kind of interaction, this flight of fancy. Then Vera Antonovna came into the room. Seeing that Julia and Sonia were getting along, she was happy, her face illuminated by a kind smile. The woman brought lunch, cream soup, stewed vegetables. Sonia grimaced as if at a sour lemon. I don't want it, she said, turning away. I don't want to eat at all, and certainly not all this. Vera Antonovna looked at Julia with a silent plea. The woman was clearly expecting help from her. Let me feed you, Julia said to Sonia, her voice soft and gentle. Each spoonful is another adventure for the princess. I'll make them up as I go. Can you imagine how much I'll have to tell you? What do you think will finish first, your food or my imagination? The trick worked. The food finished faster than Julia's imagination, but Sonia demanded more stories. Vera Antonovna threw up her hands in surprise, smiled, and left, leaving them alone. The nurse came in. Sonia immediately became gloomy, as if a cloud had covered the sun. She was already almost asleep. Lunch and the story had tired her out, but it was time for procedures that couldn't be avoided. An IV? The girl asked the nurse hopelessly, resignation in her voice. The nurse nodded sympathetically. I'll be quick. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt. You'll sleep afterward. And we'll have some tea. Vera Antonovna pulled Julia by the sleeve, leading her out of the room. You're not needed here right now. The housekeeper led Julia to the spacious, light-filled kitchen. Steaming cups of aromatic coffee and a pie that seemed to have just come out of the oven, emitting a tempting aroma, were already waiting on the table. I see you and Sonieta are getting along, the woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia, her eyes shining with joy. That's good. Sonia chased away the previous nanny, didn't accept her, but she took to you right away, as if you were family. I already called Viktor Petrovich, told him everything. He's very pleased and happy. He ordered me to take care of you. I'm happy too, Julia smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. I just feel so sorry for Sonia. My nephews, they're so noisy, so cheerful, and she lies in bed and can't even play anything. It's scary. It's unfair. What do the doctors say? Is there a chance? No prognosis. Vera Antonovna shook her head, her face clouded. They can't even make a diagnosis. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. After the IV, Sonieta will feel better for a while. You can go for a walk after her nap. Viktor Petrovich is the girl's father, I understand that. Where is her mother? On a business trip? Does she also have a demanding job so she can't stay with her daughter? Ah, if only. Vera Antonovna sighed, her voice quiet and sad. Our Lenita, she's gone. The birth was difficult. The doctors saved the baby and didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Lena, didn't complain about anything. She worried more about the baby than about herself. and look how it turned out. The day after giving birth, Lena developed a high fever. Examination, intensive care, while this and that. Her heart stopped. Some internal bleeding opened up in the poor thing, a rare case, and Soniera was also in intensive care. She was born prematurely, very tiny. It was a difficult time, very difficult. "How sad," Julia exclaimed, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "It is sad," Vera Antonovna agreed, wiping away an unbidden tear. "Let me tell you the whole story. It seems you'll be with us for a long time, so you should know who you're living with." Victor grew up in a prosperous, complete family. Loving mother and father, caring, attentive grandparents, his own room, trips to the sea every summer, lively birthdays, loyal friends. Victor had a happy childhood, as if from an advertising poster, an equally happy youth. He graduated from school with a gold medal, largely thanks to his parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired the best tutors for Victor, and the boy studied English in foreign camps. He vacationed and got an education at the same time. Trips to such places cost unimaginably much, and they weren't easy to get. But for their beloved son, especially if he was so desired and long awaited. Victor had quite elderly parents. They couldn't have a child for many years. They had almost resigned themselves to a childless fate. But then, when hope was gone, life suddenly threw them a surprise. It finally gave the couple an heir. Needless to say, Victor was never ashamed of his parents. Yes, he saw. His mother and father were much older than his classmates' relatives. But the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them. Because Victor's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the chief physician of the regional hospital. And everyone knew them, everyone respected them. It never occurred to Victor to be ashamed of his relatives. He loved and valued them. Victor grew up. His parents, aged rapidly, declined. When the boy was in his third year of university, his father passed away. A stroke, intensive care, coma, and that was it. Life ended suddenly. Victor then felt truly adult for the first time. Of course, as a student, he had to delve into the affairs of the firm his parent had left him as an inheritance. No, Victor had been interested in his father's business since his teens. He knew a lot, even had the right to sign. And yet, for the first time, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager, a colleague, a longtime friend of his deceased parent, because Victor needed to study and support his mother, who had declined greatly after her husband's death, like a wilting flower. 3 years passed. Victor had just received his diploma, just taken over his father's company, just started to gain strength. And then a new blow, this time his mother. The young man was left completely alone in the world. Victor felt unhappy and lonely in the large family home, which now seemed empty and cold. It was good that Vera Antonovna, the housekeeper and almost a member of the family, was by his side. She had known Victor since he was a baby and treated him like her own son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her unspent care to the inconsolable young man. Work pulled him out of the abyss of grief then. He had to decide things, go places, hold meetings, sign contracts, and all that stuff that required complete dedication. That's what saved Victorito then, didn't let him drown in sorrow. Time passed. Victor, from a young, inexperienced guy, turned into a smart, sharp man, a talented businessman. Vera Antonovna rejoiced, looking at her charge. He had matured, grown stronger, gained confidence, become a real man. The housekeeper greatly wanted him to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then Vera Antonovna's heart would be at peace, she could retire. "He didn't really have anyone special," Vera Antonovna said, as if recalling a distant past. "No, some girls fluttered around Victor like moths around a lamp. He was a handsome, wealthy young man. Such men are always in demand. But he would meet one, then another. None of them were right, not for his heart. I saw none of them were right for Victorito. And I didn't like them either. It always seemed like they only wanted his money. Some kind of flirts, empty shells. And then Lenita appeared. Victor met Lena literally on the street. She was walking on the sidewalk, rushing somewhere as if the wind was pushing her forward. As it turned out later, to an interview at Victor's firm. Lena had recently been laid off. The factory where she had worked as an accountant for several years after college suddenly closed, like a house of cards collapsing. Lena was now looking for a new place in the sun, and Victor went out for a walk to get some air, clear his head. He even had a goal to buy some donuts at the bakery around the corner, simple, delicious donuts. And then fate brought the young people together head-on, literally. Lena came around the corner too quickly and bumped into an unsuspecting Victor. Then everything was like in some romantic music video. Lena's bag slipped off her shoulder, its contents scattering across the asphalt like autumn leaves. Victor and Lena rushed to pick it all up, their hands accidentally touching. The girl stammered apologies. Victor assured her everything was fine and admired the girl's beautiful gray eyes in which the sky was reflected. It was love at first sight, a spark that ignited between two hearts. When the young people had sorted out the bag and its spilled contents, they looked up and smiled at each other, and in that smile was everything. And Victor, as a man, took the first step. He learned the beautiful stranger's name and then introduced himself. They walked slowly and talked, getting to know each other, as if they had known each other their whole lives. When Victor learned that Lena was rushing to his office, he beamed, his face illuminated with joy. He understood that this beautiful girl was his destiny, sent to him by the heavens. And it wasn't a coincidence that they met in such an interesting way, rather than seeing each other for the first time in a stuffy office. It was more romantic, more interesting, more pleasant, like a movie script. In short, Vera Antonovna had never seen Victor so happy. Lena turned out to be smart, understanding, kind. She also quickly got along with Vera Antonovna, which was important. She became like a daughter to her. A sweet, sweet girl. And why did she have such a fate? Vera Antonovna shook her head ruefully, her eyes filling with tears. A couple of years after meeting, Victor and Lena got married. They were a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. Love, understanding, and respect reigned, as if they were made for each other. Vera Antonovna's heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved Victorito and his wonderful, beautiful wife. They both decided not to rush with children. Vera Antonovna continued her story as if turning the pages of an old album. It was their joint decision, as if they sensed something was wrong. They traveled, worked, met with friends, lived life to the fullest. And I, foolish old woman, kept advising them not to delay. I wanted to hold a baby, a grandchild. Victor and Lena lived for themselves for a long time, a full 5 years after the wedding. They were happy together, cozy in their little world. No, they wanted children, but not right away. Later? For now, they were content. And then the news of Lena's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, a surprise from fate, but everyone in the household welcomed it happily. Well then, the time has come, Victor concluded, but decided he had waited long enough. Thank God, Vera Antonovna exclaimed, her face illuminated with happiness. I think you'll have a boy. You've become so beautiful, Lena. Girls take away their mother's beauty during pregnancy, like little vampires. But the housekeeper was mistaken. The ultrasound confirmed that Lena was expecting a girl, healthy, robust, like a ripe apple. They showed me her picture, she said. They take pictures of babies. Vera Antonovna smiled through her tears. As soon as I looked, she was the spitting image of Lenita. Our Sonieta was born just like that, resembling her mommy. Sonia. It was Lena who chose the name for their daughter. Victor and Vera Antonovna didn't object. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy wasn't easy. First, Lena suffered from morning sickness, then it seemed to subside, but other problems replaced it: high blood pressure, swelling. The baby was developing well, but the mother? She suffered, wasted away before their eyes, refused to eat, lay down a lot, exhausted. The usually energetic Lena didn't even have the strength to go downstairs. Vera Antonovna brought her food right to the bedroom, caring for her as if feeding a chick. The woman felt sorry for Lena, helped her as much as she could, and assured her that everything would pass like a bad dream after the birth of their daughter. Children don't come easily to women, Vera Antonovna sighed. Pregnancy completely exhausted Lena, drained her. Look, remember your sister? Children came relatively easily to her without major problems. In short, Lena's labor began much earlier than expected. There had been a threat of premature birth throughout the pregnancy, so fortunately the expectant mother was in the hospital under medical supervision at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but it didn't work. Sonieta was born. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound. They didn't put her on Lena's chest, didn't even show her to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the mother's womb for at least 3 more months, everything happens differently, according to different rules. Sonieta was immediately sent to intensive care. The fight for her tiny life began, cruel and uncompromising. And Lena? With Lena, everything seemed fine at first. Well, she was tired, of course, exhausted after childbirth. She was worried about her daughter, completely understandable and natural for any mother. The doctors examined the mother, found no abnormalities, and sent her to her room to rest. It was only later, when it was too late, that serious symptoms appeared, but time had been lost. Victor and I were so worried about the girl. Vera Antonovna was almost crying. It was clear that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it all, as if the wound was still bleeding. We thought the little one wouldn't survive. She was born too early, so weak, like a feather. Then, when the hospital called Victor in the morning and told him his wife had died of internal bleeding, he didn't even believe his ears at first. He couldn't accept it. He thought they were talking about Sonieta, that the little one hadn't survived. His mind refused to accept what he heard. But no, Sonia had pulled through. She turned out to be a strong girl, a real fighter. But Lena, she was gone. And she was gone from him, as if a part of himself had died. I thought he wouldn't make it, wouldn't bear it. But he recovered, found strength within himself. He had to work, he had to help Sonieta pull through, live for her sake, although, to be completely honest, at first he treated his daughter badly. He blamed her for what had happened to Lena unfairly. He understood that he shouldn't, that it was wrong, but he couldn't help himself. He was angry at her, that was all. Sonieta was discharged. They hired a nanny for her, but she couldn't take care of such a weak baby. Vera Antonovna was too old for that, but she gladly played with Sonieta, pushed her in the stroller in the yard, talked to her a lot, sang her songs. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she so desperately needed, maternal affection. The father was incapable of this during that period. His heart was closed by grief. She's like a granddaughter to me, the housekeeper smiled, her face softening. I accepted her right away, loved her with all my heart. But Victor, it took him a long time to connect with her, a long time to reach her. No, he bought everything she needed, toys, clothes. Sometimes he went for walks with her, but only if I made him, literally pushed him out. He didn't show initiative himself. He was distant. And then, one day, Sonieta got sick. Her fever went sky high. Nothing helped. It was like fire burning inside her. She was vomiting, the poor thing. She was very sick. It was a bad flu that was going around. It afflicted many people then. And babies, they suffered from it, especially severely. Well, anyway, Sonieta ended up in the hospital again. The doctors gave no prognosis, they just shrugged. And that's when Victor came to his senses, as if he had seen the light. He dropped everything, forgot about work, sat by his daughter's bedside day and night, not leaving her side for a moment. He sang her songs, told her poems, rocked her in his arms, lulled her to sleep. And Sonieta, she seemed to feel her father's care, his love. She immediately started getting better, as if she had come back to life. Our little one was discharged, and Victor became completely different with her. A real father, loving and caring, his heart had thawed. Life went on. Victor worked hard, built his business, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Sonieta grew, delighted her father and Vera Antonovna with excellent health and rare intelligence, like a wise little old woman. And everything seemed fine. Life had settled down. Only Vera Antonovna worried that Victor was still alone. It seemed to her that he wouldn't find complete happiness until he met a woman, found his soulmate. Only now it was a very difficult task. Victor's chosen one had to love and accept Sonieta as her own daughter. Otherwise, there could be no talk of any union, any family. Well, God heard my prayers. Vera Antonovna smiled, her eyes shining with hope. And then Larisa appeared in Victor's life. A beauty, you couldn't take your eyes off her, as if she had stepped off a magazine cover. And smart, too. She had a child of her own, a daughter, a little younger than Sonieta. It seemed like they made an excellent family, a perfect one. Larisa got a job at Victor's company, and it all started at some corporate event. A spark flew. In short, a typical love story. Larisa treated Sonia well, at least outwardly. She often took her and her younger daughter somewhere. Sometimes she took the girls to an amusement park, sometimes to the movies, sometimes to a cafe. Sonieta grew to love both Larisa and her younger stepsister, Alina. She was truly happy. It seemed she finally had a complete family. Victor and Larisa got married, started living together under the same roof. And then Sonieta started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, loss of appetite joined in. Examinations at the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with renowned professors. None of this yielded any results, as if the doctors were powerless against an unknown force. The girl wasted away before their eyes, fading like a candle in the wind. The first year, she was still okay. She was on her feet. Vera Antonovna was almost crying again. It was clear that her heart truly ached for the little girl, as if she were her own granddaughter. But after the new year, she took to her bed completely. She doesn't get up. She's doing badly now, very badly. It's so scary for her. And it's unclear what kind of illness has afflicted our little one, where it came from. Larisa and her daughter temporarily moved to their own apartment. It's just that Alina went to kindergarten, brought home infections from there, and for Sonieta, that was extremely dangerous. Any virus could be the last. So Larisa and Victor made that decision. No, Larisa comes often, almost every day. She's a good woman. She visits Sonieta, takes care of her, and she sometimes brings Alina too, when she's not sick with anything. Because once she started kindergarten, it began. Sick leave after sick leave. So that's how they are. Wife with one child separately, husband with the elder daughter separately. That's the family, divided by illness. Well, what can you do? It's a hopeless situation. It is a strange situation, Julia said, feeling a chill run down her spine. She was shocked by Victor and Sonia's story, as if she were listening to the script of a dramatic film. Well, it is what it is, the elderly woman shrugged, sighing. I see you got along with Sonieta. That's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you now that there's understanding. Days flowed into days, merging into a continuous stream. Julia now lived in a room located next to Sonieta's children's room, but the girl often asked the nanny to stay in her bedroom overnight, as if she was afraid of being alone in the dark. There was a very comfortable sofa in Sonia's room. Julia made her bed there. They talked before sleep, held hands, shared secrets. Julia saw. This was very important to Sonia. It gave her strength. The girl clearly lacked simple human attention, despite being surrounded by many adults. Victor was a very caring and anxious father. His love for his daughter was felt in everything. He was a pleasant person to talk to, intelligent and attentive. They often talked about Sonia, about her condition, about hopes for recovery. The man always listened carefully to Julia, didn't interrupt or argue, asked the right questions as if seeking answers. Julia also met Larissa. Yes, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, as if she had stepped off a magazine cover. A true queen, cold and unapproachable. But when Larissa interacted with Sonieta, when she adjusted the blanket on the girl, smiled at her, stroked the little one's head, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was faking it, playing a role. It showed in seemingly insignificant details. The cold glint in her eyes, a forced, unnatural smile, an elusive and very unpleasant feeling of rejection. One day, Julia had a strange, frightening dream. The girl found herself in a room, peeling wallpaper like skin stripped from a living being, creaking floors under her feet. She sat on a wobbly stool by a dark window through which nothing could be seen, only impenetrable darkness. And she understood that she was sleeping, but couldn't wake up. She desperately wanted to escape this nightmare. But then, where did she come from? Lena seemed to appear before her out of thin air. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sonia's mother in photographs hanging in the house. Lena smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very soft gaze, full of sorrow. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, melodious voice, like a gust of wind. "Watch Larissa. All the troubles come from her. She is dangerous." Having said this, she dissolved into the air, disappeared as if she had never been there. And Julia had wanted to ask her so many questions. How to watch? Why? How was she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. Or rather, she seemed to have flown into her body, falling into it from a great height. A strange, frightening sensation. Lena's words still echoed in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural, in ghosts and warning dreams. But the dream, which hardly resembled a dream, rather it felt like a journey through time and worlds, a message from the afterlife. The strange dream wouldn't let go, wouldn't leave her in peace. Larissa wasn't there the next day, and Julia waited for her like a predator waiting for its prey. She knew, she felt, this woman was involved in something bad, something horrible. Larissa was somehow harming this family and didn't love Sonia. She hated her. She didn't sympathize with the girl. She just pretended to care, played the role of a caring stepmother. And how could the others not notice? How could they be so blind? Even the experienced, long-lived Vera Antonovna. Larissa appeared the next day. As always, beautiful, heavily made up, languid, like a movie star. The first thing she did was go up to Sonieta to say hello, feigning concern. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Sonia wants something to drink," Larissa said, looking at Vera Antonovna. "Let me make her some cocoa." "Let me do it," the housekeeper bustled, always ready to help. "No, I'll manage. I want to make it for her myself." "You're so caring," Vera Antonovna exclaimed admiringly, not sensing anything amiss. Julia remained silent, as if mute. She watched Larissa as Lena had asked her to in that strange dream. For some reason, it felt like this was the important moment, the decisive one, as if Elena was nearby, invisible, and was prompting her to be vigilant, to watch carefully. Vera Antonovna bustled over the dough, absorbed in her work. Julia pretended to look out the window, admiring the scenery, but she was watching Larissa, not taking her eyes off her, and there it was, The woman skillfully pulled a small vial from her sleeve like a magician, dripped a few drops from it into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Just a couple of seconds, a few skillful, practiced movements. But Julia saw everything. Nothing escaped her attentive gaze. "The drink for the princess is ready." Larissa smiled, her smile cold and unnatural. "Julita, would you please hand me her favorite cup?" Julia obeyed, as if under hypnosis. She took Sonieta's cup with the characters from the girl's favorite cartoon, and she understood with horror. Sonia must not drink this. She must not. She had to act, not delay for a minute. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Larissa, who dropped the cup from her hands. The cup fell, shattering into pieces like fragile hope. The cocoa spilled onto the floor in a dark, ominous puddle. "I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy." Julia bustled, grabbed a cloth, and started wiping the spilled puddle, collecting the glass shards. "It's nothing. I'll make another one." Larissa's voice held poorly concealed irritation, anger. Julia couldn't do the same thing again. It would arouse suspicion. It would ruin everything. So she had to accept that Sonieta would receive the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Larissa and Vera Antonovna were with Sonia, Julia, with trembling hands, wrung out the cloth she had used to wipe the cocoa into a clean jar. She needed to know exactly what Larissa had put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just ordinary vitamins, and then there was no point in causing panic, sowing discord. But something told the girl that wasn't the case, that it was something terrible. She had to wait 2 long, agonizing days for the analysis results. When she saw the report, Julia was horrified. The drink contained poison, deadly. The symptoms of poisoning matched those of Sonieta. This meant the girl's weakness was because her stepmother was systematically poisoning her, slowly killing her, just like in a scary fairy tale where the wicked stepmother torments her stepdaughter. Julia didn't know who to turn to with her terrible news. Vera Antonovna? But what could she do? An elderly woman? Victor? He might not believe her, think Julia had gone mad. What should she do? Larissa couldn't be allowed near the girl anymore. She wanted to send her to the next world and had almost succeeded in her monstrous endeavor. And yet, Julia, gathering her courage as if before jumping into an abyss, spoke to Victor. She told him everything, about her strange dream, about the cocoa, and about the lab results, as if dumping a sack of stones on him. Julia was afraid he would yell at her, call her crazy, kick her out, or worse, accuse her of wanting to harm his daughter herself. "You know," Victor said, looking at Julia with a long, attentive gaze, "I would probably have fired you immediately after those words. It's very strange. You'll agree. But just yesterday, I also had an unusual dream. Lena. She asked me to believe you. Just believe you. Nothing more. Let's not tell anyone about this for now. And take some time off. I need to figure everything out, get to the bottom of the truth. Vera Antonovna will call you when you can come back to work." Julia spent those few days on edge, unable to rest. She didn't know what was happening in Victor's house and was very worried about Sonieta, to whom she had already become attached with all her heart, as if she were her own child. But Victor had told her to wait for the call. So she would wait, however long it took. Vera Antonovna called. Julia, seeing her name on the phone screen, became anxious, her heart stopping in anticipation. What would they tell her now? How had everything gone? "Come," Vera Antonovna only said, her voice sounding agitated. "Come quickly. Sonieta misses you very much." Julia didn't need much persuading. Half an hour later, she was already at Victor's house. The owner himself opened the door. He looked as calm and composed as ever on the outside, but relief was visible in his eyes. From his appearance, it was hard to guess what had happened during those days. "I want to thank you." The man finally allowed himself to smile, and this smile was sincere, from the heart. "You were right. Larissa, she really wanted to. I'm even afraid to say it out loud. That wretch wanted to poison Sonia." "Can you believe it?" Vera Antonovna exclaimed, not holding back, her voice trembling with indignation. "And I trusted her so much, like myself." The story turned out to be banal and old as the world, steeped in greed and envy. Greedy Larisa was not going to tolerate a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's beloved daughter. She wanted her own daughter, Alina, to be the sole heir to all of Victor's fortune. Well, first herself, of course, and then her daughter. Larisa had once studied to be a pharmacist, although she never worked a day in that profession, preferring to live off wealthy admirers. Nature had generously endowed her with beauty, so the woman had opportunities for such a life. The knowledge gained in college was enough to devise a way to send her hated stepdaughter to the next world. Poison. A poison that was difficult to detect in the blood, that killed slowly, leaving no traces. And Larisa poured the toxic substance into the food she prepared for Sonieta, into her drinks. And the girl weakened, slowly faded, approaching the edge. She was almost there, just one step away. "It's unbelievable, unfathomable," Vera Antonovna kept saying, shaking her head. Julia understood her. Indeed, Larisa's act was monstrous, inhuman. How could she do that to a helpless child who trusted her, who loved her? In short, Victor installed hidden surveillance cameras in the kitchen. That's how it was revealed that Larisa added poison to Sonia's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself. Sometimes she was cunning. She poured from the vial into food prepared by Vera Antonovna, taking advantage of her kindness. I myself, with my own hands, took that poison to Sonieta. Vera Antonovna was almost crying again, her voice breaking. In short, Larisa was caught red-handed, the crime recorded on video. She was now under investigation, awaiting trial. Alina was taken by her father, a man who had long wanted to be involved in his child's life, but was prevented because he was too poor for it, unworthy in Larisa's eyes. "Alenita will be fine," Vera Antonovna assured. "The child is not to blame for what her mother wanted to do." "And Sonieta? How is she?" Julia asked anxiously. "And Sonieta is wonderful." A clear voice rang out from somewhere behind, like a song. Julia turned and met Sonia's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she already had enough strength to walk around the house by herself without help. A real miracle, as if a fairy had touched her with a magic wand. The doctors said she would recover quickly now, her body would cleanse itself of the poison. Julia and Sergio walked slowly along the display windows of a children's store, holding hands. It was the girls' section, so it felt to both of them as if they had stepped into a kingdom of pink and purple, a world of dolls and magic. Dolls, children's makeup kits, stuffed animals, their eyes were dazzled by the abundance. "When I was in the USA, a guy bought his nephew a voice-controlled robot. That's something. Maybe Sonia would like something like that?" Sergio suggested, remembering American curiosities. "She's a girl," Julia reminded him, smiling. "She definitely wants a doll, a cartoon character. We have to try to find one. Maybe by her next birthday, she won't want toys at all. She'll be completely grown up. Children grow up so fast, you don't even realize it." "Amazing. We'll see for ourselves soon." Sergio placed his hand on Julia's rounded belly, gently, lovingly. The baby immediately responded, as if feeling its father's touch. Still a weak kick, but already quite noticeable. And that other job? She still needed it. And Julia had grown used to everyone in that house, to the sweet, cheerful girl, to the kind, wise Vera Antonovna, to the always busy but polite and attentive Viktor Petrovich. She didn't want to leave them. They had become family to her. The adults had initially decided not to tell Sonia the full truth about what had happened to her, considering the story too frightening for a child's mind. But the smart girl managed to put two and two together. She overheard something, figured something out herself. This story didn't have a strong, devastating effect on her as the adults had feared. Sonia took it quite calmly, with philosophical composure. "It's all like in fairy tales," the girl shrugged as if it were a matter of course. The little one was returning to life, gaining strength. In September, she started school with her peers, radiant and happy. And Julia? Julia was finally able to re-enroll in university, fulfilling her long-held dream. She chose distance learning as she needed not only to study, but also to work. However, her work now more closely resembled living with family, with the loved ones she had found here. Sweet, cheerful Sonieta, kind, wise Vera Antonovna, always busy but polite and attentive Viktor Petrovich. With these people, Julia felt cozy, warm, and comfortable, as if she had found her true home. They had accepted her, loved her, and were also immensely grateful to her for saving Sonieta. It was terrifying to think what could have happened if not for that strange dream, if not for the voice from the past. They discussed this unusual event, trying to find an explanation. First with Viktor, then with Vera Antonovna. Vera Antonovna was sure. Lenita had broken through time and worlds, through the veil of death, to save her daughter, to warn them. Viktor just shook his head, not expressing his opinion, remaining a rationalist. And Julia? She didn't know what to think. Her mind wavered between logic and the inexplicable. Perhaps Larisa had immediately aroused her subconscious suspicion because Sonieta's stepmother hadn't pleased her at first sight. She had caused rejection. In the dream, only. Well, Viktor had also dreamed of Lena, and she had asked him to believe Julia. Just believe her, without explanations. That was harder to explain. It went beyond the ordinary. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sonieta was doing her homework. Vera Antonovna was busy around the house, as always. Julia needed to go to the university, take some documents to the dean's office, formalities. And then suddenly, Sergio stepped out to meet her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes. She recoiled as if she had seen a ghost. He looked at Julia as if no one in the world was more important to him, as if she were the center of his universe. "I finally found you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, and unable to restrain himself, he pulled her close, tightly, as if afraid to let go. Julia didn't understand anything. Her brain refused to process the information, but she didn't resist. She clung to the man she loved, inhaled his scent, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about Sergio's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance, about the pain she had endured. The explanation turned out to be laughably simple, almost absurd. Sergio had simply dropped his phone in the ocean during a boat trip. Naturally, the gadget had disappeared forever, sinking to the bottom. Julia wasn't registered on social media, so he simply couldn't contact her. There was no way. Sergio wrote letters, like in the good old days, sent telegrams, hoping to reach her. But Julia, she had moved in with Viktor and rarely went home, so the letters piled up in the mailbox. When she returned home, she saw that the mailbox door was broken, pried open by someone. Someone had opened the box for some reason and taken the letters. Maybe children, maybe a curious neighbor looking for gossip. In short, Julia had received no news from Sergio, which was why she thought he had forgotten about her, started a new life, betrayed her, left her alone. I couldn't drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. It was unbearable without you, without news of you. Every day was torture. But I knew I had to wait. And then, financially, I would provide for us for many years to come. I would be able to give you everything you deserve. And then I could fly to you and explain everything, tell you the truth. I had no idea how dire your situation was, how hard things were for you. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I knew nothing about you losing your job. How hard it must have been for you, my dear. Just like that. An unfortunate turn of events, a cruel twist of fate. Julia was happy that her feelings and Sergio's feelings were real, that there was no betrayal or deception in her life. just a misunderstanding. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved, like a knot untied. Sergio now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he had dreamed of: concerts, performances, tours, opportunities to bring his music to people who were ready to accept it, who were waiting for it. And money, of course, the money he had lacked so much. Sergio was even able to buy an apartment for the two of them, their family nest. Renovation was in full swing there now, preparing for a new life. Julia and Sergio got married. They were already expecting a child, the fruit of their shared love. Julia felt happy and loved, finally finding harmony. She no longer worked for Victor on a permanent basis, and the strengthened and matured Sonia no longer needed a round-the-clock caregiver nanny. But they all remained friends, a real family bound not by blood but by love and gratitude. And right now, Julia and Sergio were choosing for their future baby.